Today we're continuing in Luke chapter 9 with the mention of Elijah in the gospel. And in verses 28 to 36, we have the story of the Transfiguration of Jesus. And this occurs 8 days after Jesus has revealed for the first time his identity. We have Peter's confession of faith. And now it's 8 days later, and Jesus took Peter, John, and James and went up on the mountain to pray. As we've shared numerous times before, these three men represent Jesus' innermost core of support. Peter, James, and John are his closest disciples, it appears. And while he's praying, his appearance is changed. And then our verses for the day are verses 30 and 31. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. So why is it significant that Peter, James, and John see Jesus talking with Moses and Elijah? Well, Moses represents what? The law. He is the lawgiver. He is the one who brought the people of Israel out of slavery into Egypt, led them to the precipice of the promised land, was the giver of God's law, including the Ten Commandments. So Moses, again, very, very significant. Elijah represents the prophets and one of the great prophets in the history of Israel. And Jesus comes to fulfill the law and the prophets we read about in the Gospels. And here we have these two figures with him in this transfiguration, this transformational experience. And they're speaking of his departure, which he is about to accomplish at Jerusalem. And so, again, this is Luke's way of saying that the crucifixion of Jesus, this wasn't just the work of evil, powerful men. This was part of God's plan, and that Jesus knows that going to Jerusalem is going to mean the end of his physical human life. And the encouragement and support, I'm sure, being able to talk with Moses and Elijah must have been very good for Jesus and his spirit. For Peter, James, and John, they're obviously a little overwhelmed. Luke says that they were weighed down with sleep, but since they stayed awake, they saw this whole vision, and Peter doesn't know what to say, and so he says, how about if we make 3 dwellings or booths, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. And, you know, this can happen to us. We have a mountaintop spiritual experience, and we just want to stay there and hold the moment, if you will, for as long as possible. And that's not really what God desires. Oftentimes we talk a lot, people do, Christians do, about worshiping Jesus. But what the gospel calls us to over and over is not to worship Jesus, but to listen to him and follow him and do what he says. And again, the transfiguration ends with then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen, or my beloved. Listen to him." And that's what God wants us to do, to listen to Jesus and his teaching, and to live it, and to follow it, and to share it.